So when I'm obsessing about something, I go and get my journal out and I go and write it as many times as I need to. My hands might be tired, but I'm letting it out. I'm letting it go. Or if I'm still ruminating, I go, Shaun, we're ruminating. Let's stop. So when you catch yourself, people don't realize that awareness is probably 50% of the battle. The rest is up to you, right? And if you're struggling now and you're thinking, oh yeah, but I'm aware of it, but what am I doing to change it? Awareness is a big thing you've got to give yourself credit for.
Yep.
So that's something I've realized. But also having people around me who are not yes people around me who, yes, they know I've gone through a hard time, but they still tell me to get up and keep going. Or they tell me that you can't just give up. Like, this is not time to give up. Feel what you feel, but as I say, cry to not give up, cry to keep going. If you're in pain, you might as well get a reward from it. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do, you know?
Hi, I'm the self-development coach, Johnny Lawrence, and welcome to the Self-Development Podcast. Today I have an exciting episode, and in this episode, I'll be chatting with the inspiring Shaun Flores. Shaun is an OCD advocate, a model, an actor, and has performed 2 TED Talks entitled The Failures of Multiculturalism and The Straitjacket of Masculinity. He's also the host of the Flower Hour podcast, and today's intention is to take on the challenging and often uncomfortable conversations around Black culture and education, learning to identify and regulate your emotions as a man, and how depression can be anger turned inwards. How are you today, Shaun?
Yeah, no, I'm thankful, grateful to be on your podcast, first of all. It's been great that we're able to connect in such a powerful way. We know how powerful podcasts are as a medium of exchange of information. But yeah, I think today I think most days I try not to label as good or bad. We have good or bad moments, but I'm in a decent place, I would say. I'm not exactly happy and I'm not sad. I'm quite at a middle ground. But no, I'm grateful to be here because I think it's been a tumultuous journey that I've been on, and with everything that's gone on in my life and seeing how me speaking so openly about my story has helped people, I'm just in gratitude. I think, yeah, gratitude.
Oh, I love that, mate. I really do. It's you know, we're going to hear a lot about your story today, hopefully, and you know, you're a strong man. I want to say that off the offset. You know, I've got a lot of respect for you. Some of the things that you've had to face is hard enough, but to be so open about it is just is a testament to the person you are. So I'm grateful to have you on the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
No, definitely. So am I. You know, it's funny because people say that I'm quite open, but I came from a background where things were quite hidden and no one really spoke about things. And I think in many ways that inspired me to just want to speak so candidly about things that happen in my life. And I think being forthright with your truth is the only thing that you've got on you. Everything else can be altered and changed, but as long as you know what's happened within, you can really deliver that to the world and help other people. I think my mission is ultimately to leave the world in a better place than I found it, and to leave a legacy that has impact. Or I often say in one of my bios is I try to be an influencer that has the right influence on the world. I think that's something that's just it's pivotal. So
I absolutely love that. I love that. I try to stay away from influencer. I say encourager.
Encourager, yeah.
Yeah,
no,
because you know, it's tough, man. It's really tough. And you know, I've been through some stuff myself, and I think that's probably why we resonate so much. You know, when you've been through that struggle, you do recognize it in other people. And obviously we have other similarities too. So
No, absolutely.
Yeah, but one of the things that I get told a lot, and I'm almost absolutely definitely sure that you do, and that is that how articulate I am. And your way, articulation is a very important tool, skill, whatever, because if you can't translate what you're trying to say in the right way in which people can hear it and feel it, then sometimes it can go on deaf ears.
Absolutely. And especially in the social media world that we're living in and the attention economy that we're under, you really have to articulate, enunciate, have great diction to some sort of degree. But then in other ways, social clout will carry you really far. And I was laughing with one of my friends saying that if I wanted to get my mental health message out even further, I could do a couple nonsense dances on TikTok and go viral, and then use the clout from that to really spread a powerful message. But in many ways, I feel like I'm selling my soul. But unfortunately, sometimes to play the game, you can end up getting further, but it depends on where your morals and your ethics are. But yeah, I often have been told in the past that I sound white or I sound really posh, or I sound like I went to a private school. And just to make it clear, no, I went to a state school. Most of the boys in my year, unfortunately, were from single parents like backgrounds like myself. A lot of the boys unfortunately ended up in jail for drugs. Some died, unfortunately, were murdered. And yeah, I come from a background, the lower socioeconomic, but my mum just made me read a lot. She was really determined to ensure that I wasn't like the statistic. That was always what she said to me growing up. She doesn't want me to end up like one of the other statistics out there.
Yeah. That this is that power I talk about, because that journey is hard. I have some similarities there too, it's very easy to get pulled into that street life. It's very easy to get pulled in, especially if you've got, I had a very unstable family life. So what some of the street life people can do is they can create that stability that you're searching for.
I suppose it's family, right?
That's right. Yeah. Which brings comfort, and then from then on, and then you end up going down a pathway that's very, very hard to get away from once you're down there. I dipped my toes in there, realized it wasn't for me. I'm not about that life.
Yeah.
and had to make some tough decisions, some scary decisions, but thankfully it paid off. And I now live a completely different life, as seemingly you do too. But I mean, let's start there. I mean, would you tell people about yourself and your absolutely remarkable journey?
Well, first of all, I want to say a lot of men don't get credit for when they change their lives. So I want to say thank you to you for changing your life, because it's not easy. They say life necessitates change, but sometimes with some men, we can be really stubborn and still not change because we're used to certain behaviors. So I want to give you your credit. And as I often say, give people their flowers in accordance to my surname. But yeah, so myself, where do I even start? So yeah, I do modeling, influencing. I do a bit of acting. I'm trying to get into voiceover work. I'm training to be a life coach. Before my OCD diagnosis, I was training, but life mentally it was getting a bit too rough. But now I have the answers, so I'm planning to go back and finish my life coach qualification. I'm hoping to become a therapist for people with OCD as well. But what else do I do? That's a really good question. I've just had a piece written. Well, I do freelance journalism, so I just had a piece published in the Metro about OCD, which has had an incredible response from people. A lot of people have come out and really spoken about their OCD, and I'm trying to, as I say to people, give a voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless, because when you have a mental illness or a mental difficulty such as OCD, quite often it's framed such as suffering, and I no longer use that term because I know how powerful language is, so I use it, I'm living with OCD. So that's another thing that I do. I do OCD advocacy, so I'm a volunteer advocate with Orchard OCD, the only charity in the UK funding better and faster treatment for people with OCD. So that's something else I'm also doing. So yeah, my life, I suppose, is a myriad of creativity, and I'm trying to figure out who I am, where I want to be. Well, I think I figured out who I am to a degree, but I also know that, you want to be like water, I think, as Bruce Lee said. You want to, be able to adjust and to adapt. So I think I'm on a path to self-development, self-inquiry, and self-awareness. I would say that's what describes Shaun Flores at the moment, a man on a mission.
I think one of the things that I've come to learn is that I know nothing. And
Yes.
what's funny is that every now and again I start thinking I know something, only to learn the hard lesson that I know nothing all over again.
Absolutely.
And also that control is a myth. That
Yes.
feeling that we're in control is only a feeling, it's not real. And something you said to me then resonated with me about language, because I always refer to myself as a survivor of physical child abuse instead of a victim, because I did survive it and I was a victim, but I don't want to be that victim anymore.
Yes.
And that's what's important, is standing in your power. And it's what I hear in you. And I mean, we got quite a bit to get through today, but I think the dominating thing here is, from what you just said, is OCD. And I think there's a massive misconception about what OCD is. It gets thrown away as like, oh, he's got OCD because he likes the volume at an even number or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's part of it, but I know it's a deeper issue than that. Would you like to talk about what it is and your experience of it, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah. So, all right, I'll start from the beginning. So, when I was younger, I unfortunately had caught an STI, and I wasn't even sleeping around. I'd caught it in my first relationship. The girl that I was with at the time, she had chlamydia. She lied to me, and she believed Well, she tried to make me believe that somehow me, the virgin who had never had anything sexual, would have given it to her. So that was that was one thing. And then every time I went to the toilet, I was convinced I always had something. And this was an obsessive, repetitive, unwanted thought that I could not leave. I would go to the sexual health clinic constantly. If I had a thought in my head that I had an STI, I'd run to the clinic. At the worst, I paid £300 for a same-day test because I was that convinced I had something. And even at the clinics, they turned around and kept saying to me, why do I keep coming back? I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm convinced I have something. So it went from chlamydia, the fear of chlamydia, to the fear of HIV. So that one faded out. Then I had a dream one day about a guy in boxers. I wasn't erect. It wasn't a wet dream. But I was 100% convinced I was gay, and I couldn't get this obsessive idea out of my head again. I threw up. I was so anxious. I was looking around trying to find evidence. Some of my gay friends, I was like, am I gay because I'm hanging around with gay people? Am I gay because of the fashion industry? So with OCD, it's characterized as unwanted, repetitive, intrusive thoughts. So everybody gets intrusive thoughts. But unfortunately, people with OCD, the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, and I think it's the amygdala, which is obviously our fear shaped, which what our brain creates fear. It's how our brain responds to fear. It's overactive. So that's essentially the best way to describe what OCD is. So when people go, oh, he's so OCD, OCD is not just cleaning. Cleaning is a subtype. There's race OCD. So there's people in their head who have thoughts where they're racist and they can't get over it. There's sexual orientation OCD. There's harm OCD. So I live with mainly harm OCD and sexual orientation OCD. So questions around my sexuality and harm. So committing harm to myself and committing harm to others. So those are the things that I have, and I still get the thoughts. I've just learned to live with them and to deal with them and to realize it doesn't say anything about who I am as a person. And I spend a lot of time trying to do a lot of advocacy, because since writing these articles and being on these podcasts like this, so many Black people have reached out to me in silence and said, I finally feel seen. I finally feel heard. And when I've been to OCD events, I'm the only Black guy. I went to an event recently, and it's not their fault. It's called OCD Game Change, which was hosted in London. I was the only Black guy in that building. Everyone else was white. And there was one Asian kid, but he was quite shy, you could tell. And he heard my story and he wanted to come and speak to me directly, which I was honored, because it shows you the power you can have on people when you are so transparent about your journey.
Mate, I literally don't know what to say. That is that's phenomenal. But there was so much there. Just what you're doing is, I don't even know if I've got a way of explaining it, and I'm the articulate person apparently. But there's so much there about, you're right about Black people not, I know so many Black people that probably are having similar struggles to yourself, and they can't own that. They don't want to. And if you don't, like you say, you're living with it and you're being open about it. It's real. You're not just talking about, because as I said at the beginning, OCD, in some ways it's menialized by the fact that, oh yeah, it's just this, it's just that. Everybody's got a little bit of it and all that sort of stuff. But what you're talking about is very, very serious.
Yeah.
And must be very distressing at times. So a lot of respect for it.
Well, OCD quite often, as you said, it can be it can be, trivialized in many ways, because people think it's an adjective or it's a quirk. OCD is not something you want to desire to have. I'll tell you that much. So I was supposed to finish, so the gay thought, right? So I had this obsessive gay thought. Then the next one was when I was with one of my female friends, an intrusive thought around the word rape popped into my head. And I panicked. I screamed at her to leave because I was 100% convinced I was going to hurt her. And that was probably one of the toughest times of my life, because I suppose, and I'm sure you probably feel like this yourself, the worst thing in the world, I think, as a man, to be called is a rapist, or to commit any sort of sexual assault. So it tormented me. I tried to sleep. I had suicide thoughts flash into my head. The mental health, the ambulance came because I called them. Then I was okay. I was like, okay, maybe I need to go to therapy. So I went to therapy. I went to psychodynamic counseling. And if anyone knows, for OCD, you're supposed to have a specific type of therapy, which is CBT, ERP, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and exposure response prevention. So if you have an intrusive thought, you might just be able to be like, oh, that doesn't say anything about me. It's whatever it is. People with OCD, what makes us different is we ruminate on it. And rumination leads quite typically to depression. So you chew the cud over and over and over, and you try to go down this rabbit hole thinking, why am I thinking like this? So I'll give you an example. In one of my therapy lessons around the word rape, and I'm just going to speak about it openly because there's nothing else that I can do. I really want this to help people out there. I had to write a script essentially where I was a rapist and I was going to rape a woman. And it was horrible because I remember I said to my therapist, I was crying my eyes out while writing this, but it's needed to get through it. So with OCD, you have to face your worst fears. And what you're teaching your brain every time is it's just a thought. A thought does not mean you are going to do something. We all have intrusive thoughts. But as I said, OCD, it's almost like an anxiety on a silly amount of steroids. So that's why my journey with OCD has been a tumultuous one, but OCD was only the beginning of my journey. So I was diagnosed with OCD on Saturday, the 4th of June, by a therapist. After that, I tore my ACL, MCL, fractured my leg and tore my meniscus in my right knee while playing football. After that, what happened after that? That's a really good one. I was in the hospital for 3 days with pneumonia, and that was horrible as well. I woke up, with severe pain in my left side, and I thought it was my kidneys, and they did a CT scan, and they were shocked it was pneumonia. So after that happened now, you think life couldn't get any better. But my auntie was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. My mum's partner is in a home with vascular dementia, so he's not getting any better. While I was on the phone to my therapist talking about my relationships with people and how I want stability, I said to her, I want to have a better relationship with my half-brother. So I found my half-brother about 2 years ago. I didn't know I had a half-brother. I found out from one of my drunk uncle's ramblings. If anyone's grown up in the Caribbean community, you want to find out the truth, get some of your family members drunk. So I found him, spoke to him on the internet, and then there was a time when I was inebriated. And I said to him, I really want a relationship with you. I don't want to always feel like I'm forcing a relationship with you. And he didn't really care, to be very honest with you. You know, we spoke a few times, but I really wanted the relationship more than him. So when I was on the phone to my therapist, I said, "Oh, let me just see how my brother Keith is doing." And as I go onto his Facebook, I find out he died on the 25th of August. So that was added on top of everything else, right? So that was another thing. Then after that, my cousin was murdered in Trinidad. He was found with gunshot wounds. And he died. His grandmother, my mum's sister, so my auntie, also died in hospital of, it was a complication surrounding diabetes, which was gangrene. So this is why I say to people that you can't control what happens to you, but you can always control your response. And I think, I'm not saying trauma is something to be desired, but the one thing I've learned to understand psychologically is something called PTG, which is post-traumatic growth, where you grow through your trauma. And that has been a core element of my self-development journey and my self-inquiry journey. So I don't want to go too much on, but I would say that's what's epitomized what's happened in my life so far.
Yeah, I mean, I often talk about it, the lessons that inevitably are there to be learned from trauma. It has to be the right time to hear that. You know, when if you just get really bad news and someone says, "Oh, what's the lesson there?" You know, that's not helpful. But you're right, there is growth in trauma. It's very, very difficult. And I think a lot of the time it's people's resistance to that growth that causes the pain. A lot of the time, I use this analogy a lot around a stinging nettle. I heard a story about how if you get stung by a stinging nettle, the leaf that stung you has got the antidote inside it, but people are too scared to crush it and use it. And I think that's it. We have these problems inside us, these things that are worrying us because, causing us issues, challenges, whatever, but we're too scared to face them. So we just pretend they're not there when they are there. And what happens then is that you just allow that problem, that issue, that challenge just to run amok inside you and cause destruction in your relationships, in your work life, in your career, in your whatever, And I think, like you just said, PTG, surprisingly to me, it's the first time I've ever heard that term. And that is exactly what is needed when it comes to it. It's that one thing that you fear the most. You have to turn and face that. That is scary. It's absolutely scary. It's terrifying. And, it might get worse before it gets better. But once you get that lesson inside you and you start not just first of all becoming aware of it, taking accountability for it too, what you can, most often you can't take accountability for it all, but then the rest you have to accept, you have to accept that. And that comes with That's difficult too. A lot of people think that acceptance is forgiveness. It isn't. It's something different. And then at the end, what the ultimate thing that creates that change, I think, is that action. What are you going to do now? Which is
Yes.
what you just said. How are you going to respond to it? How are you going to respond to it? And it's interesting to me because there'll be a lot of people who will say, "Oh, yeah, okay, well, we don't always get to choose our responses and stuff." But I think if anyone can speak to that, it's you. I mean, that what
So,
you just told me is unreal.
so I often say to people, when people have asked me, how have I survived, right?
Mm.
And I say it to them because I recognize that bad times are temporary. I will not live forever in a bad place. Like, as I said, don't get me wrong, it has been a rough ride. I've cried many nights, I've been upset many nights, depression has hit a few times. But the one thing I always remember with depression, quite often, it's a mindset thing, quite often, right?
Mm.
So when I was at the worst of my OCD, and it's funny because I've said this as I probably should make this into a shirt. I literally woke up one morning and I just said, well, I'm not sure if I should swear. I'm allowed to swear.
Yeah, you do it.
I literally said to myself, fuck this. We're going to get up and change the world. That was my mentality. I said, cool. I'm sad. I'm upset. I'm depressed. I'm probably a bit hopeless. But these are all decisions of my own making. I can't change what happened to me. What I do next is on me, you
Mm.
know? And I think as much as it's controversial nowadays, accountability and responsibility are topics that bring about a lot of contentious debate. And I think, as I said, trauma is not to be desired, and there's more that we can do in the world to better the world for people. But when we strengthen our responses to things, we realize that it won't have the same impact on us as much as it once did. And don't get me wrong, as I said, I still have my hard moments. I still journal every single day. I meditate every single day without fail because it helps me to get space between myself and the thoughts where at times, if anyone knows psychology, if you believe you are your thoughts, it's cognitive fusion. When you have space from your thoughts, it's known as cognitive diffusion. So you diffuse yourself from the thought. So if you say to someone, I am having the thought, that's cognitive fusion. Whereas if you go, I notice I am having the thought, even if you just say, I notice, you already realize you've put a break between yourself and the thought. So when I go through hard times now, because I'm strengthening my brain in many ways, I catch myself going, I'm still grateful for this morning I had good breakfast, or this morning I was able to have a good conversation. So that's something that's really helped me, but it took training. It did
Mm.
take training. I've had to train my brain, and I'm still working on it. I am not perfect by any way, shape, or form, but I can promise you to people out there that are listening, times do get better.
Mm. They have
Times
to.
do. Yeah, times do have to get better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such power, such power. You're absolutely right. Um, I want to talk about rumination. Obviously, I have a list of questions here, but I get a feeling we're not going to get through them because I'm finding everything you're saying so intriguing. Rumination you're right. We have these thoughts, right? So we have these negative, positive, whatever you want to call it, unhelpful, helpful thoughts. And we ruminate on them, which means we stay there, right?
Yes.
And there's that saying, isn't it? If you're going through hell, why stop? Or if you're
Yeah.
going through hell, keep going, I think it is.
Or there's also the saying, if you're in pain, don't cry to give up, cry to keep going.
Mm, yes, yes, and that's it. It's that's I'm a coach, and that's what I help people with. I help people move forward because that rumination. If we take rumination as an analogy, so it's the equivalent to you've cut yourself. It's a pretty nasty cut, and you won't stop itching and picking the scab. You just won't leave it alone. You won't let it heal. And then obviously with that analogy, there are things you can do to help the healing process, and there's things you can do to hinder the healing process. And what I want to ask you is, as somebody that's been through such significant trauma, what did you do and what do you do to pull yourself out of those ruminating states?
So the first thing I did was when I was no longer when I wasn't always in therapy. So I used to see my therapist once or twice a week, and it's a lot less now. I train a lot of my own brain by myself. I cannot rely solely on a therapist, right? And I think like yourself with coaching, when I was a life coach, they often said that as a coach, we're nothing more than the passenger. The client is the driver. We
Mm.
just help drive them to where they're going. And that's something really important to remember. So when my therapist wasn't around, obviously OCD was once classed as an anxiety disorder, but now it's classed as more of a compulsive disorder. So I would watch a lot of videos on techniques. So if I caught myself thinking negatively, I'd switch the thought out and go, oh, but that was a positive thing to focus on. Because humans, we have a proclivity to negativity. So I just had to keep switching, reframing my thoughts. Another thing I've had to learn to do, which I catch myself doing every now and then, is I label my thoughts as good or bad. And thoughts aren't good or bad. It's your brain has a story to tell, and your mind creates this story, and it does whatever it wants to do. Once you start to realize that, you start to have a lot more freedom. But another thing that I've had to do is just accept. And acceptance is one of the hardest things that I've had to do in my life, because when I've held grudges, when I've struggled for forgiveness, it's because I want someone to feel the pain that I felt. And that's impossible. That's impossible. I can't do that. And there's still moments when I'm like, I want to be angry because it's my default. But I'm like, we're not angry, Shaun. You want to be angry because it's all you knew at one point. You wanted vengeance. And meditation has been revolutionary. I would also say journaling has been great. So if anyone knows that how important journaling is, well, essentially what you're practicing is brain dumping. You're taking things out of your brain and you're putting it onto paper. And when you're doing that, you're literally teaching your brain to let things go. So when I'm obsessing about something, I go and get my journal out and I go and write it as many times as I need to. My hands might be tired, but I'm letting it out. I'm letting it go. Or if I'm still ruminating, I go, Shaun, we're ruminating. Let's stop. So when you catch yourself, people don't realize that awareness is probably 50% of the battle. The rest is up to you, right? And if you're struggling now and you're thinking, oh yeah, but I'm aware of it, but what am I doing to change it? Awareness is a big thing you've got to give yourself credit for.
Yep.
So that's something I've realized. But also having people around me who are not yes people around me who, yes, they know I've gone through a hard time, but they still tell me to get up and keep going. Or they tell me that you can't just give up. Like, this is not time to give up. Feel what you feel. But as I say, cry to not give up, cry to keep going. If you're in pain, you might as well get a reward from it. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do, you know? But I think gratitude has also just been, I can't begin to tell you how important gratitude has been. You know, it's been so important because when my cousin was murdered, he used to call me all the time and I didn't have much time to make a phone conversation with him because I was just so busy and I felt horrible. I said to my therapist, I really should have made some more time for him. And I can't change what happened, but I can change what I do going forward now. And I'm really trying to work on a lot of the things that I don't like. So I'm not a very tactile person with a lot of my male friends, but some of my male friends communicate love differently to me. So I'm on a self-development journey, but yeah, gratitude, journaling, meditating, being your own therapist when you don't have other people there, being your own coach. Obviously, coaches and therapists are professionals and they do things to a degree, but also just you can't rely on people all the time. You've got to be an independent person. So when my therapist would come back after a session, I'd be like, oh, I've done this and I've done that. And it was great because I felt like I'm taking myself out of a victim mindset and serving others. And that's been something that's been great for taking me out of my depression. So yeah, being of service to others has really been fantastic as well.
Yeah, I mean how you just described journaling it is the best definition of it and the reason to do it that I've ever heard. Like brain dumping and teaching your brain to let go. That is exactly what journaling is. That is, I've never heard it put that way. Again, speaks to the articulation, doesn't it?
Yeah, do you know what it is?
Yeah.
It's because when I was first diagnosed with OCD, I didn't want to read anything on it because obviously I had a fear that I was all these different things. I was scared I was bipolar, schizophrenia, all these different things. And then I just said to myself, we have stuff we need to do, man. And once I read into what journaling does, I was like, at the beginning, I was like, oh, this is nonsense. I was like, what am I doing this for, Brian? And as time goes on, you start to really realize your brain picks it up. It's neuroplasticity, right? You rewire, you're literally rewiring your brain. And because we can't see our brains being rewired, we think it doesn't matter, but it actually does change and it matters heavily. So often with anxiety, right? So what keeps OCD alive is it's the anxiety. It's not the thoughts, it's the anxiety around the thoughts, the belief that it's telling you something. So when you reframe and rewire anxiety, you start to realize a lot. And another thing, when I started reading that you understand is that Anxiety and excitement are two of the exact same emotion. Anxiety is the fear of the future, and excitement is it's the same chemical response, right? And rumination is, depression about the past, obsession about the past, and anxiety is fear of the future. And what both of them do is they operate at extremes, but you forgot the middle ground, which is the present, right?
Yeah.
So that's something else that I've realized. But yeah, like this is why I think coming back to coaching and to be a therapist, I've got a renewed sense of passion to give to people because I have a lived experience of what darkness feels like.
Yeah, I got a good friend of mine. He says, when education meets experience, it creates wisdom.
Absolutely.
And I think you're right. I mean, not everybody has to have experiences in order to help people, but I think it really does help with empathy, which is
Yeah.
very, very helpful when it comes to helping people. I just, like I continue to say, so much respect for you, mate. I really do. One of the things that I help with my clients is understanding. A lot of people like to believe that they know what's going to happen, and even though they don't. But one of the systems that I put into place for them is something I call the 4 A's, which is awareness, accountability, acceptance, and action. It's what I just spoke about just now. And what that does is it helps people feel like they're moving towards something.
Yes.
And like I said, that awareness that, okay, what is it that I'm having trouble with? Let's name it. Let's get it out there. Let's be aware of it so we know our enemy, if you will, or we know what we need to work with, or we know what we need to move past. And then accountability, what can I take responsibility for? And then the acceptance, which we've just spoken about, is very, very hard. Because the thing about acceptance I find is that people think they say to me, oh, I'm trying to accept it. And I say, well, there's your problem. Because acceptance is a non-action. There's no action required. You just have to literally let it be what it is, which isn't easy. I had to accept a lot of violence from my past. But what choice do I have? I can't go back and change those things. What I can do is I can change my perception of it now. It's something that happened to me. It's not happening to me. So what can I then do? I can then take the lessons from it, which is what you spoke about. And then the last bit is the actions. Okay, how can I move forward? How can I use what I know to help me instead of hold me back? What is helpful? What's helpful right now? What can I use? Your story's inspiring, and the honesty that you put on it. I mean, it must have been horrible to have those sort of thoughts in them situations. It must have been really, really, really scary.
Yeah, it was. I think scary is an underestimation of what it really was. I think
Yeah.
I wish there was a word that I could use to describe it, and there's only words that I understand in my vernacular, such as petrified, whatever it might be. But the fear was absolutely all-encompassing and all-consuming. When I had that thought, I just thought, no, 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 I don't want to do that. No, no, no. Why is that in my head? And it was probably one of the toughest moments of my life. And then after that, I had a suicide thought, and the suicide thought was an image of me jumping off of a bridge. When I panicked, I ran home, I called all my friends, and I told them I'm suicidal. I said, I want to die. I said, what am I doing here? Obviously, now to understand that's cognitive fusion, right? That I realized, oh, well, that's not actually what I think. It scares me because that's not what I want to do. And quite often when we talk about doing the things that frighten us the most, OCD is a direct confrontation of your worst fears. And you've got to learn to lean into it and then to come out on the other side and almost to walk hand in hand with it. And then as time goes on and the hands no longer need to be held, you learn to drop the loads. You learn to let it go. And there's a great metaphor that we have in something called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is it's the demons on a boat. So you're driving a boat, and as you're driving this boat, there's these demons at the bottom of the cabin that want to get up. They want to come in. They want to just take attention. They want to take you off. So you put your foot on the cabin door because you don't want to let them up, but they keep banging. So they're bothering you even more because you're thinking about it. There's a physical reaction. But then what you realize is let the door open. Let the demons come. Let them run around. Let them try and do whatever. They're going to go away eventually. They will leave because they're going to realize, damn, we just can't get this guy's attention. But you need to still keep driving that boat amidst that turbulent time. And you will keep finding a place to go. Because I think similar to what you said, when we try to accept, it's almost as like it's trying to hold a heavy weight. And an anchor's a heavy thing to carry, right? When you learn to let it go and to let it be, whatever way that might work for you, there's a renewed sense of freedom that comes with that. It's a very different sense of freedom. And as I said, you and I, we probably still have a lot of our own stuff to learn. And you were saying earlier on that, we sometimes, when you think you know something, and as the more you read, you realize I know nothing. It's one of the most humbling experiences in the world to realize the more you read, there is a vast array of information in this world that we cannot even comprehend.
Yeah.
So I often say as a joke, the best place to put me is a prison, because I can come out woke like Malcolm X, but I'll come out a little bit more muscular. I'm not really going to go to prison, but I often say that as a joke because I would have more time to sit down and just indulge with books.
It's all about perception. Like, I say to people all the time, they say, "Oh, what's your advice?" And I say, I don't have any advice. I don't know what you should do. What I am trying to do is offer a different perspective, or if I possibly can, a more helpful perspective. Because the way I see it is that we're all in the same house looking out the window, but we're looking out different windows and we can see different things.
Yeah.
And and sometimes that perspective can be helpful, and sometimes it's just something that needs to sit in there until you're ready to understand it, or ready to accept it, or ready to use it. I think all the time about when I was younger, people told me things, and at the time I was like, "What a load of rubbish." And then one day something happens, and I go, "Oh,
It clicks.
yeah." There's I think it's a fable where they say, where the son says to the dad, "Dad, every year you get smarter and smarter." And I love that, because it's obviously not the dad, it's the children, it's the child's awareness growing. So it's starting to understand things, because you can talk to a kid about anything, but they're unable to understand certain things because they haven't got that capability yet. And I think that's life, isn't it? It's like, I look at life like a stairway, and you're standing on the ground floor and you can see what you can see. And then you go up another step and you can see a bit more. And then the next step and you can see a bit more. But there comes a point where you can see so much from such a height that the people down below you they've got no comprehension. They can't understand what you can see because they can't see it too. And I
Yeah.
think, and that's what happens in self-development as you grow. It challenges your friendships, it challenges your relationships, it challenges the way you see the world. And you have to make some pretty tough decisions sometimes. You might have day ones, some friends that you had from day one, and you might have to look back and go, this is tough. This might need to change, and that's okay. That's okay. Um, you've been so honest, and so I'm so grateful for everything you've shared with us so far. But I mean, you mentioned earlier about how people have talked about you being educated, and you said that you didn't go to a private school or anything like that. But as a young Black man growing up, there are often trappings that generally pull you away from education. And how was you able to avoid those? And did you avoid those? And how did you become the educated man that you are today?
The most illegal thing I ever did when I was young was I used to steal money from my mum's purse so I could go to school and buy a ginger beer.
Does she know?
Oh yeah, she knew. She
I was
found out
going to
because
say, man, I want to get you in trouble.
Oh no, absolutely. Like money used to go missing, and it was because I just wanted to feel included, like the rest of the other boys who were making money. But at the time, I didn't know how these boys were making money, which I now understand from connecting with a lot of them. They were making it through obviously drugs, and yeah, if I was to be honest with you, I am no angel by any means. That the drug life is an incredibly tempting and enticing one because it's fast money, and quite often I've been lucky enough that I've never got involved in it, but I've said to my friends that with my intelligence, I could probably run a country on drugs, or I could be a syndicate. And that's what frightens me the most, because I think in a parallel universe, I could really be a absolute drug lord, a kingpin, and it wouldn't bother me. But my moral conscience and my moral compass really stops me from doing a lot of things, but it definitely is enticing. When you're young and, as I said, my dad died on Christmas Day when I was 6, and it was just my mum. My mum couldn't afford certain things. And when in school, I remember I wanted kickers because all the boys had kickers. So I went to my mum and I said, I want kickers. And when you're young, you don't care about whether your mum can afford it or not. You just care about your own status and your own image. I got the kickers and I went and played football, and I put a hole in the front of the kickers regardless. So it taught me a lot. And then when I couldn't get the Nike shoes that I wanted, I settled for a different pair of Nike shoes. When I couldn't get Nike, I had Kappa, and I got laughed at for having Kappa. So everyone knows that boys, it's all about status competition, right? It's all about who can have the best things. And there were times when, not when I was young, that I was tempted, because if I was so afraid of my mum catching me doing anything wrong or anything bad that it prevented me. But as I got older, it started to become very tempting, because I had studied for such a long time, and money wasn't coming in as quickly as I wanted it to. With modeling, it wasn't coming in as quickly as I wanted it to. The same with influence. Now, still working in Waitrose for 3 years. I wanted more money because, as we understand, money is a tool for freedom, right? And money doesn't make you happy, but it sure damn gives you a better shot at happiness quite often, right?
Yeah, it helps.
Especially the way that we are socialized in the Western world. But there's a lot of times it's been tempting. But when I see a lot of my friends who have been caught for what they've done, and they're not bad people, I want people to really remember this. Just because someone is a quote unquote criminal or a deviant doesn't make them a bad person. I often say that it's grub first and ethics later. That's typically how a lot of these boys are. And a lot of the boys I went to school with, they sold drugs because they wanted to take the load off their mums' back. A lot of their mums were single mums.
Yeah.
Even if you think about Dave, right? I've got a lot of respect for Dave as an artist, but Dave's stabbed people. He's admitted it himself. Dave sold drugs. That's why he has the name Santan Dave, because he was doing fraud. But look at where he is now. He's been able to turn what is a negative into something positive, and he relays his pain in ways that I can't even conceptualize. But yeah, there was definitely an allure and a big pull factor to doing a lot of illicit, illegal activity. But I also do understand that not everything legal is moral.
There is that. There is that. I mean, and I think it's important when people hear powerful stories like yourself and like Dave, is that they listen without judgment. They listen without judgment because it's very difficult to understand what's any person is going through, because we can't walk the same journeys. None of us can. They could be very, very similar, but they're not the same, you know, and you never know what's going on inside a person's head, man. You know, that's why you have all these things where they say, you know, be kind, because you never know what's going on in someone's life, and you don't. You know, I've had times where I've gone up and I've stood in front of schools and I've given really wonderful speeches that have been really motivating. But inside, I received bad news that morning. No one else knew about that. You know, I went out there and inspired people and all those things, but inside I was deeply sad, you know, because so people never know what's going on in people's lives. But, you know, again, once again, you've been really helpful with helping understand that. It's really a real skill of yours, I think. I'm sure you know that though, which is good.
You know, do you know what's funny? It's actually a skill I'm really trying to work on, because quite often I think I could do things a lot better, but that's not, I wouldn't say it's the perfectionist in me, but I understand to speak to different audiences, you have to speak different languages. So
yes,
my friend who went to boarding school, but he grew up quite poor, and his story is probably even more traumatic than mine. We make jokes and we say that he speaks Caucasianese because he can speak to the white audience in ways that I can't, even myself, right? He can translate a message in a way that keeps them on the edge of their seats. And we make jokes such as, it's probably a bit racially insensitive, but such as, bring a little quiche, they'll be eaten out of your hands, right? Because you go to different audiences and it has different messages. But it's still something I'm learning. I'm definitely not perfect, but no, yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one, that, like, you're right. And there'll be some times where, you know, people just they refuse to hear you. They're not going to hear you, and that's okay. That's not your audience, you know, and they won't hear that, and that's okay. But, you know, it's interesting you say that. I've made quite a few friends since I've been working in the trauma space, who share, you know, similar or equally, you know, tragic traumas stories. And you're right, there is like a dark humor that comes with that, isn't there? There's like a real dark humor. It's kind of like, you know, you make fun and joke about things and you're like, it's not funny, and if anyone heard you, it'd be awful, you know. But I think it's something that happens, you know. I very often get asked when I'm at different things if I've ever been in the Marines, because I have a similar humor in that sense, because they've seen some dark stuff, you know, really dark stuff. Your TED Talks, I watched them, thoroughly enjoyed them. And again, you touched on some really powerful vulnerabilities in there. But one of the things that I really resonated with when you mentioned that people say you speak like a white man. I mean, what have you taken from that statement and why?
Well, at first I used to be really offended by it and really hurt. But when I went on my journey to understanding Black history, I understood where it came from. Because people forget that schools originally were only available to the upper class in the UK, especially, and across the world, it was a very elitist institution. It's only been, you know, not recently, but a couple of years ago that schools were opened up to a plethora of different people from different backgrounds. But typically, when we associate articulation, we associate it with the white upper class mentality. But also, we forget that in slavery, when the slaves were first freed, the first thing they allowed them to do was to buy clothes and to read, but then to also reenact the same slave master slave dynamic on people. So I think a lot of those views have come from colonization, slavery, and a lot of the way we educate our young boys to see how we speak. So we understand that slang is nothing more than shortened language. That's what it actually means, right? But because we live in a time where pop culture and the culture that's dominant, we see a lot of boys speaking in a very different way. To see boys speak outside of that kind of archetype of what we have it means to be a young black boy in an inner city London, we associate anything outside of that dominant norm with something that's very I suppose different, if that makes sense. So when me and my friends, we speak, we're all quite articulate per se. And I thought I sounded posh until I met some of my other friends who are really, well, this is me saying it in a way for people to understand this. If you think I sound posh, there's people who sound even more posh than me, quote unquote. But also people forget that the way we articulate ourselves is associated with wealth. That's another thing we don't realize. That's to do with social mobility. So the more you go up the class ladder, the greater access you have to resources, the greater access you might have to, whether that's teachers, education, materials. Your environment will change and help you to become the person that you are now, if that makes sense. But it's a multifaceted and a multi-layered answer, but I would reduce them to slavery, colonization, education, class, and social mobility. Because I think in the UK, funnily enough, we live in a more classist society than racist. America is more racist than classist, because class is such a deeply entrenched system in the UK. Like, you can be black and wealthy in the UK and you'll still get racism, don't get me wrong, but it's the class that makes a bigger issue. It's the more of a common denominator than race. But yeah, I've dealt with it now I take it as a compliment. I'm like, well, I try to do what else I can do. And truthfully, not in an attack to anybody out there. A lot of my other friends who speak the way they speak, it's just not a way I would want to speak anyway. And my friends don't want to speak the way I speak either.
Yeah.
So it's a mutually accepted ground.
Yeah, and that's it. It's neither is wrong or right. It's a preference, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think people sometimes get attached to preferences and start to believe they're facts. when they're not, they're just preferences. But I mean, you brought up some really good points there, and it's you spoke about how enticing that street life can be, and how much you value education. And I suppose what I'm wondering is, in your opinion, how can young people today begin to value education again? Because I mean, there's a lot around education that I would say best way to frame it is outdated. There's a lot of outdated notions in education, things that no longer serve us. I was laughing the other day on the Shits and Gives podcast. I don't know if you ever listened to that. And
I've actually never listened. No.
No, them two fellas make me laugh. They really do. But they were talking about how when they were at school, their maths teacher used to try and teach them maths, and they said, "Why do I need to know maths when I can use a calculator?" And the teacher would say, "Well, it's not as if you're going to walk around with a calculator in your pocket for the rest of your life, and now we have phones."
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pushback from children now that don't understand why they need to learn what they need to learn, and maybe in some cases they don't. But how can they begin to value education again, in your opinion?
It's a really tough question, because for me, growing up, education was the passport to the future. And you grow up and you believe that to do the typical the typical conveyor belt of activity. So you go to uni, you do your GCSEs or SATs, then your GCSEs, then your A levels, then you go to uni, you get a job, you get a career. But we're living in a time now where children are seeing different options outside of the mainstream. I can't remember what the number was on the statistically speaking, but more kids want to be YouTubers than lawyers, I think it is, and doctors.
I heard that.
Because they're seeing social media as a viable way of an income. But again, the unfortunate thing that happens in our society now, which I think makes it tough for children to value education, is We live in a glorified highlight society, and Instagram is a classic example of that. It's a highlights reel. The same with TikTok. And I think because our consumption of social media is ever growing, and we're living in an attention economy, the education system has to catch up in ways that grab kids' attention and also allows them to be the best that they can be. But so when I've taught in schools, I've taught kids, right? And I think one of the things that we've had to be as young teachers is engaging from the bat. When you can speak the language these kids speak, they already feel like they're at home. So when we had to deliver, when I was doing my master's, and I did my master's in race, media, and social justice at Goldsmiths University, we had to go into schools and teach alongside my other friends. And when we were developing these presentations, we would ask my other colleagues, I'm like, if we were their age, what would we want to learn about? And I still wanted to learn about all the nerdy stuff, but I wanted to have the balance. I wanted to feel in the culture at the same time. I wanted to feel like I had a place that was home. So we would start off with the education, and we would teach them where education came from. And kids love a bit of history. They love Greeks. They love to learn about the Greeks, but also about the first ever universities was actually in Mali, if I remember correctly, formerly known as Timbuktu. That was where most European scholars came and actually learned education, if my history serves me correctly. But also in the second half, when I would teach, I taught them about the media. So I would put up a picture, for example, and there would be a song, and I would say, break down these song lyrics. And when these kids hear these songs, they get excited because they're like, yeah, I've heard this, sir. I've heard this. But then we say, right, you've heard it. Now let's get a sheet out with the lyrics. And what does this lyric mean? So you're teaching them English literature, right? You're teaching them to be critical, but you're also teaching them in a way that is actually engaged and it's exciting. And all the kids in the class, irrespective of race, enjoyed it. I remember we went to, I'm trying to remember the name of the area. It's predominantly Indian, Bangladeshi. I think it's Tower Hamlet area. And when we walked into the room, me and my colleagues were afraid that the kids wouldn't have been able to relate. But the minute we get into this presentation, the kids are so excited because irrespective, music is a universal language. So is money. Kids want to learn. They want to understand. And at the end of the class, the kids would always come up to us and be like, oh, thank you, sir, or thank you, miss. That was actually so exciting. And they would want us to come back. But I do also think it's not the teachers' faults in school. I think we have a really easy job to come in and to give these kids a different perspective, whereas these teachers, they have to, be part of a curriculum that they may not even believe in. Yeah. So I think another way that education can be more appealing to kids is giving teachers more of a freedom on how they can actually implement the curriculum. And I think a good example of that is in the Scandinavian countries. I think it's Norway or Denmark, where to be a teacher, you have to have really high qualifications regardless. But the way they implement it, they can do whatever they want as long as the kids pass. So they can teach the subject matter however they want. They can create their own subject matter. And there's a famous saying, I think it's Norway, where the teachers are not questioned by the parents because they have such a belief in the education system. Whereas over here, we don't really believe in that education system, do we? So we've got to rebuild relationships that make it feel familial in that sense, right? We've got to feel like we're sending our children to schools where they're not only just part of a system, but a system that loves, cares about them, wants them to see the best, wants them to be the best. But we need to teach kids relevant things: taxes, finance, crypto is going to be the future, even if we don't want it to be.
Yeah.
Let these kids have a fair shot at the world.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, a big example of what you're talking about there is, have you heard of Big Money?
No, I haven't actually.
There's a guy on TikTok, on Instagram, right? Street guy, not street guy. He speaks in that way. I say that. And
what do they call it? Urban.
Yeah, urban, ebonics, something like that.
Ebonics, yeah. I think the term is ebonics.
Yeah, it's something like that. But he teaches chemistry.
Oh, I've seen the one you're talking about.
Yeah. But my kids love it. They absolutely love it. And you're right. You put that in any other way, you put it in the conventional way. This is all the stuff they're learning at school, completely ignored it. Watched it on TikTok, Big Money. Before you know it, science is cool.
Yeah.
And they're in, So that is one of the best examples that I've seen, a chap named Big Money. And I love it. I'm going to try and get him on the podcast, but he's ignoring me at the moment. So,
Well, let me know if I can help, man. I'm more than happy to help source people. But
yeah,
no, I agree with you. And I was saying this to some of my friends, if we grew up and we had people we could relate to a little bit more, it makes education exciting. Can you
Yeah,
imagine having kids that grow up and they're like, oh no, mom, I don't want to stay home. I want to go to school today because this teacher's going to be in and they're going to be teaching me this.
yeah. They
Have
should
you
be rock stars, like they should be. You
absolutely?
know?
And I have you ever seen? I don't know if you've ever been into schools or you've got kids yourself, but a year 7 kid and a year 8 kid, they start school quite excited. And the minute they hit year 9, whether that's puberty or not, or whether it's the education system has drained all the fun out of them, they start to become very disenfranchised of education.
Mm.
And that's a common theme that I've really noticed because when we would go into schools and kids would see that we were quite young and we could talk the way they taught, straight away, it's a common ground that we were able to unify our relationship and the experience we had at the time under. So I think those things matter even if we don't think they matter.
Yeah.
Um, and some people probably listening and be like, oh, you're just making excuses for kids who don't want to learn. But when you go to work, and I'm sure there's ways you learn that are not best suited to you, and there's ways that you learn that are best suited to you, and you might struggle. So what's the difference?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was speaking to somebody called Miss Moorish
Okay.
at a convention I went to recently, and she went into Baltimore school
Okay.
where all of the kids were classified as naughty, disruptive,
Yeah.
dangerous, whatever. And she spoke about how one of them was actually building a bomb at one point at the school. So it was pretty bad. And she got called in to help this school. And what she identified really quickly was actually there was no point her talking to the kids. So what she did is she worked with the adults, the teachers, and she
Yes.
brought that percentage down to whatever the percentage was. I can't remember it, so I'm not going to try and pretend I do. But the percentage was very high, and she brought it down to 0 because
Wow.
she worked with the teachers. And what she identified was everything that teacher does, everything that they say, the way they say it, when they say it, yeah, how they respond to certain events that happen in the classroom, mattered. Every single thing they said. And there was a lot of bad habits that have been built up as human beings do. Not, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but these habits had built up over time and they sort of rinse and repeat, because being a teacher is hard. It's being
Oh,
very,
it's
it's very, very difficult.
undeniably hard.
Yeah. And I went to an event over the week or so ago, health and well-being for educators. And I did some speaking there. But what was more impactful to me was what I learned from speaking to the teachers. I've never seen or felt such emotion in a room as I did there, because those teachers are going to school, following a curriculum. As you say, they may or may not agree with it. They're getting chairs thrown at them. They're getting threatened, not just threatened at school, like, I'm going to come to your house after school and I'm going to
Yeah.
find you. That's terrifying.
Kids are teachers are not paid enough.
They're not. And then there's another story I heard is that somebody who was a really good educator left education to go and be the manager of a Walmart in the United States, because
Wow.
and he left that job, but he got paid 20 grand more to be the manager of Walmart than he was a teacher. That just speaks to how the value, doesn't it? Like, it was sort of a, why wouldn't you do that? You don't have to put up with all that violence. You don't have to put up with all of that stuff. Because what I also learned on that event was that there's a lot of toxic environments built up over years, decades in schools, and they're
Absolutely.
being passed down. Someone was telling me about a head teacher walking around different teachers' displays with a ruler, saying that they were out by a few millimeters on certain fonts and stuff. And I'm just like, as if they need that,
Yeah,
it was just amazing to me.
it's such archaic ways that we see the education system
Mm.
continuing to, as we said, perpetuate a lot of continuing inequalities in society. And I really do agree, because I wanted to be a teacher at one point and I looked at the salary and I thought, no way. Like, let's get realistic. I still need to earn a salary. But I think what I do is a powerful teaching medium, even if it's, I'm not in school. But there's someone called Dr. Umar Johnson, who's quite controversial with a lot of people. But he says to people, parents no longer have an impact on children the minute they go to school. A child goes to school for 8 hours a day and they come home and they pretty much sleep. The teachers have a massive impact on children as they grow up. And I'm not sure if you saw the clip of Ian Wright where He found his teacher. They found his teacher, and he thought his teacher was dead because people had told him his teacher had died. And you could see the pain in his eyes because he was so happy to see him. And he was his first ever positive male role model for him growing up. Teachers have a profound impact on students' lives. And I still remember the teachers who were nice to me. You'll never forget them because you're young, you're impressionable, and we all want to be loved and cared about. And especially when you're a child, when you are your most vulnerable, it's incredible when you've got teachers who care about you. But also, I'm stuck in between a crossroads sometimes, right? Where it's prepare the child for the road and not the road for the child. So the idea that, the woman went to Baltimore and taught the adults how to accommodate to the students, which I think is absolutely viable. And if there's clearly there's evidence for it that works. But then at what point do we also make sure that the students know that there's a threshold to their behavior, that there needs to be proper discipline, but discipline that allows them to be reintroduced back into the education system? Because quite often, I think there was a report a couple of years ago, and I forgot the name of the guy who made it, but essentially kicking children out is almost like a school to prison pipeline in the UK and the US.
Yeah.
If you exclude a child, you might as well send them to prison, essentially is what they're saying, because the rest of their life starts to move downhill. So that's something else we have to remember. We have to live in a less of a retributive society, but a society that allows the reintroduction for people that are struggling or perhaps might have certain issues. We need to accommodate better to people as well. So I want to see it as a two-pronged approach, because I think that truly will allow for a harmony in the education system.
Yeah, I love that you use the word harmony and not balance, because I think balance sometimes gets used, but what that suggests is that everything needs to be the same. That's not always how it is, Things need to be varied for different people, because everybody has different experiences of life. But I mean, I could talk to you for hours, man. I really could.
Well, listen, man, whenever you're free, let's make it happen, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely, definitely. I mean, I got a couple more questions if you're okay for time.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to move away from education. I think you've covered that now, and I think I hope that I really do hope sometimes that the right people hear stuff like that, because the education system does need to change. But I think people get scared that they have to change the whole curriculum, and maybe they do, but that is a big task and potentially unrealistic. But there are so many easy wins. Little things that could be changed, and I wonder what you could do about that, because I think you might be the guy.
Well, I hope so. I've joined a consultancy firm where we're going to be talking about I keep forgetting what the acronym EDI is. Equality and diversity, right? Inclusion, equality. I can't remember what it is exactly, but I speak to a lot of people and I give a lot of advice, right? As much as I can based on the evidence at hand, and I try to make sure it's not ideologically driven. I want people to know things are factually based and see if we can implement them. But yeah, you're right. I want the right people to listen to it, and I want people to have an approach that is open to it. Because I think quite often you and I said this before, you can give people all the information, but they might not receive it. It might just go in and out. They have to be at a time and a place where they want to receive it. And I know after everything that's happened with me, I needed to go through some stuff to actually appreciate what was actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, again, as you said earlier, it's about the way you put that over as well. You have to speak the same language. You have to get them to understand it. There's no point using some examples that kids are never, ever going to experience because they're from a certain area or unlikely to experience. It's better to use examples that are in their area or in their sphere of understanding. So I'm going to keep an eye on that and see what you do about that, because I got a feeling that you're the guy. So
I hope so.
That's quite exciting. How do you feel about emotional regulation and how it impacts male mental health? Because there's all this stigma around men not talking, and it's true. But I mean, my belief is I had a client a couple of weeks ago, and he gave me an amazing example. He said his wife always gives him a bell on the way home from the supermarket and says, "I'm going to be 5 minutes." And him and the kids go out and they pick up all the shopping bags, and the kids take the light stuff and he takes the heavy stuff. And he says, I take the heavy stuff because I know that the bags can sometimes be too heavy for them, and if they hold the handles it cuts into their hands, and I understand that pain and I don't want to pass that pain on to them. He says, and that's why I keep silent. That's an analogy for him, why he keeps silent. He knows what it feels like to bear that pain and doesn't want to pass it on to people he loves. And I'd never heard that said before until he said it like that. And I was like, that's a really beautiful analogy. But I mean, men keep quiet, but we do have issues around identifying how we're feeling. We seem to jump to anger quite quickly. You know, things get us angry. But as I've identified over my life, anger isn't essentially an emotion, it's a reaction to an emotion. I'm angry because I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm angry because I'm feeling resentful or whatever it is. So, you know, how can men better understand their emotions and emotionally regulate, do you feel?
I think by having people around you that encourage you to be emotional. So in my TEDx talk, the Straitjacket of Masculinity that I delivered earlier this year, one of my biggest inspirations has been one of my friends, Malcolm. And Malcolm's a very emotional guy.
Was that the guy you gave flowers to?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
right.
guy. He has no fear of being emotional and being the guy he wants to be, and he's inspired me in countless ways because I grew up in an environment in a very conservative Caribbean family that don't talk about emotions. It's not a conversation that happens. Mental health is not something that happens. It's swept under the rug. And everyone knows whatever you put under the rug, it grows bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And from having people like Malcolm around, they exposed me to a different reality than what I was used to. So when Malcolm was always playing soft music, I'll be like, oh, for goodness sake, I'm tired of this, bro. I want to put some rap on. And we know the idea in rap is essentially to get over your trauma is to use women, money, materialism, and, you know, well, yeah, that helps you get over your trauma, but that doesn't do that. When you run from pain, pain will always come back and chase you. That's something I've always realized. But having Malcolm there as a friend was a constant confrontation with my own ideals and my own values and the way I saw emotions. So I saw emotions as a burden. I saw it as something, if I felt it, oh God, I don't want to feel like this, man. Why do I need to feel like this? It was almost like a cognitive dissonance and an absolute denial of the layers I had and the dimensions I had as an actual human being. But most importantly, the layers I had as a black man. So for me, it was having the right friends around me who encouraged me and allowed me to be emotional. And they saw that I was in pain in other ways, but they never took it. Well, sometimes they took it personally, obviously, they're human. But they allowed me a space to be understood. That was amazing. But also, when it comes to men, I think there was a famous quote from Erykah Badu where someone said, how do you get men to fall in love with you? And she said, I listen. A lot of men don't feel listened to. And isn't it interesting that if you speak to a lot of prostitutes, this is not an ethnographic study in any way, shape, or form, but from the people I've spoken to, a lot of prostitutes have said that when a lot of men are married or in relationships, they don't pay them for sex. Sometimes they pay them for emotional comfort. They go there and it's like a therapy session and they leave. Isn't that interesting? Because a lot of men in life don't feel listened to. But you've also got to allow yourself your own space for that, to be able to listen to yourself. But I would say also trying to get a man to do something he likes. I don't know if you're in a relationship or anything, but I don't know if your partner has ever said, oh, let's do this. I know you like that. You feel really happy inside, because quite often as a guy, we cater to everybody else. We are typically in service to others, right? We bear the brunt. I'm not saying women don't do this, but I think with men, we have a very unique struggle, the same that women have a unique struggle. And I can't speak for women. I can only speak as a man from my experience and what I see as symmetry and parallels. But that's something else I've really noticed. Doing something a man really likes and really enjoys, get to know him, find out what does he like to do. And men will open up. We will always open. Well, I think we will always open up. I find quite rarely it takes a lot for a man to not open up unless he's been laughed at, he's been mocked, he's not been taken seriously. But also just letting a man break down. I've broken down. I've had really tough times, and I've had friends around me who knew when I needed their emotional comfort, and other times when I was like, do you know what? I'm struggling right now and I just need someone to talk to. That's it. You know,
Yeah.
I think it's about figuring out if people want solutions or they want to be listened to.
Yeah. And I think so much can be gained from everybody just from feeling heard, and somebody looking at you, not with that sympathy look, with that,
Yes.
I hear you, man, that
Yeah.
empathy over sympathy,
Our
because
sympathy is annoying sometimes.
yeah, well, I am personally, I'm not somebody that looks for sympathy. Just don't. But empathy, I always understand. And what, when I've been talking in schools and stuff, and I look over at that one kid and I'm talking about how he might be finding it hard at home, and I can instantly spot the kids that having trouble. Maybe they're in a domestic violence situation. Maybe there's poverty in the room. Maybe, I don't know what it is, but you can see the ones, they just look at you because it's like all of a sudden they're like, oh, you're like me. And the
Yes.
message I love to pass on is it gets better, gets easier. Because when you're a kid, there's this helpless feeling, like you can't do anything about it. Your dad's too big, or you can't go out and get a job. So you're this little adult who's got all of this energy towards the solution, but you can't do anything. It's really frustrating. It's really frustrating, really, really frustrating. But you mentioned something about how, and I find it really intriguing about how a lot of young black guys, especially, they're chasing that money, chasing the girls and stuff. And I was speaking to Coop Blackson on the podcast a little while ago, and he spoke a lot about ego. And he was saying that he really profoundly, he said, ego's job is to seek but never find, because if it does find, it does itself out of a job. And it's funny how all of those things are plentiful things. You can get more money, you can get more girls, but you're never going to find what you're looking for because it's not there.
It becomes like an insatiable hunger. You're never going to quench that first.
No, you're not, because you're looking in the wrong place. And it's like,
absolutely,
of course, how amazing would the answer be is, oh, I'll just make more money, or I'll just go and grab some more girls or whatever. I don't know, but that's not a thing, is it? It's not that. It's like the story I heard once of the musk deer, and the musk deer was in love with the smell of musk, and it would search endlessly for this smell. One time it ended up running off the edge of a cliff, believing that the smell was off the edge of the cliff, only to realize that the smell was within itself.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like the answers are within you. Again, it comes down to that fear. You're not going towards that thing because it scares you, man. It really, really scares you. And it's okay to be scared, because what I've learned is that what I grew up in, again, with fear everywhere, all the time. So I grew up believing that I was a fearful, weak person. And I spent the first 25 years of my life believing that was the truth. And I acted that way because that's what I believed. But then I realized something. You can't be, I kept saying to myself, I need to be brave, but I'm not a brave person. I'm a weak person. I'm a fearful person. But guess what? It's actually impossible to be brave without first being scared.
Absolutely.
If you're not scared, the bravery is not a thing.
I was going to say, there's a quote that says, the difference between is it a hero and someone who's afraid is someone who is afraid uses fear to keep them away, whereas a hero uses it to push them forward. It's something, I'm paraphrasing it, right? It's that kind of mentality. And I'm sure you've learned this on your own journey and from clients you've worked with, that when you teach people to embrace uncertainty and to use their anxiety and their worries to propel them forward, that is where you grow the most. It is not the absence of fear, it's the courage to move forward through it. And even I'm sure you've had days like this, especially as a man. We have tough days, you have really rough days, but we always remember that we're going to get through it. It's something we in the moment we might not necessarily feel it, but we will overcome. And I just think it's just such a poignant point you've made. It's so poignant that we grow the most where we are the most uncomfortable.
We have to, man. We have to. And it's, having those crutches as well. It's like if you think about when a tree's planted and they put that little stake in there next to it to keep it safe and to keep it going for a little while, it needs that. I look at that like a parent. But the longer that parent does everything for you and takes over that job for you, the weaker adult you become.
Absolutely.
Because if that, say that tree grows in a really windy environment, but it relies on the stick, if the stick breaks or goes, then it's not prepared for that environment anymore. And environments are key to, well, not key, but they're a massive essential part of who we are. We generally react throughout the day to our environments. An analogy I like to use is if you look at like a pinball, and then your pinball gets hit by something, which is like a trigger, right? Like we feeling triggered or whatever. And then that ball doesn't move unless it interacts with its environment.
Yes.
It bounces off of things, and that's what perpetuates its next movement. And that's what we're like sometimes. And sometimes what we need to do is realize that we have that capability and that
Yeah.
ability to go, wait, I don't need to react to that. I can respond, and this is how I want to respond. And sometimes the counterintuitive emotion is do nothing. But what people don't understand is doing nothing is still doing something if you choose to do nothing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there, man. Okay, again, I get carried away talking to you easily, but I better give you that last question. It's the question I ask everybody. Is there anything that you'd like to pass on that could help people with their self-development?
I suppose the last bit of advice I could ever, well, I suppose maybe not advice, but what works for me is make sure you do the things that scare you the most. And it's okay to be scared and to operate through fear, because it gets easier, as you and I have said, with time. But I think just also making sure you've got an environment around you that facilitates and encourages your best sense of self. But as I said, having friends who have held me accountable and responsible and do not just feel sympathy and they feel empathy, but they say, Shaun, cool, take your time to feel what you're feeling, but you still have to get up and go and change the world. You've got a mission at hand. So that's something that's really helped me. Having people to be accountable to and to be responsible for. Being off service has been incredible, because I'm even thinking about getting a dog, but the cost of living is saying otherwise, right? I want to, because I remember a guy on the train said to me, he said, when I've gone through hard times, to know I still have to walk my dog has got me out of bed when I don't want to get out of bed. Because he said he's in service to his dog. He realizes his dog has changed his life. And in many ways, he probably wonders how much he's changed his dog's life. It's small things like that that have made a big difference. And advice is be of service to someone. When you can't be of service to yourself, be of service to others. And I find quite often when I've helped others, it's been a direct mirror reflection back to myself and what I sometimes need to work on, whether that's I need to work on patience, whether that's I need to work on my sense of emotions. And as I said, I'm still in therapy. I'm still getting work. I'm still trying to develop myself and become the best man that I can be. But I also recognize that's a journey and it's not a destination. But just having those people around you are so important. But being real with yourself. Don't sit here and try to bullshit yourself. That's why I come to this podcast real. I'm not perfect. I've got a lot of issues I need to work on. I've got a lot of things I need to work on in my environment and the way I've grown up. But it doesn't mean it's my death sentence. I think that's something I've realized, you know. So that's some of the advice I would give, because I think littered throughout this conversation has been different things that I hope someone can take away, and whoever's listening, that you can realize that the hard times are never here to stay. You know, tough times create tough people. Well, we know that. And some people may fall between the cracks, and everyone's got a different journey to go on. Don't rush that process. Take time. Really take time.
Shaun, thank you for that wisdom, mate. Really, I can already think of a few regular listeners that are gonna love that. Really are. Listen, what's next for you, and where can people find you?
So well, I'll send you all of my socials and everything, so you can add it to whatever I think they call it show notes. That's how
There
you
you go.
know. That's
Yeah.
how you know I didn't get to add. Haven't been on my podcast for a while, but you can find me on social media. Every platform is Shaun Flores, so TheShaunFlores. Yeah, I'm writing a lot of articles. So I've had a piece come out in the Metro. I'm writing a few more articles now about my OCD experience, mental health. I've just joined a speaking agency, so hopefully I'm going to be speaking a lot more to people and really helping to change their lives. But I often say to people, when I've run my podcast, I say to people that I'm the driver. I put the passenger in, I drop the person off at the door for who's the podcast guest. And I'm sure with the podcast you have, it's a very similar analogy. So I have my DMs are open. I'm happy to communicate with people. I'm happy to meet with people, because as I said, I knew what it was to be silent, and I knew what it was to be alone. And especially when it comes to mental health issues such as OCD, the people that have reached out to me, they're desperate for help. And sometimes you can help someone by just a simple conversation, a bit of, hey, how you doing, man? Do you want to meet up? You want to get some food? That saves people's lives.
Yeah.
And it gives somebody something to look forward to. So yeah, you can find me everywhere. My DMs are open. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hopefully whenever you can come onto my podcast when I start to get it back up and running.
Hey, listen, it'd be an absolute pleasure, mate. It really would. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed today's conversation, and I know others will do too. So thank you for your time. And yeah, we'll do this again on your podcast.
Definitely,
you
man.
said it on recorded conversation. Now you got to do it.
No, I will, man. I'm a man of my words. Word is bond.
I would imagine that's absolutely true. So thank you very much.